Welcome to another episode of Anything But 9 to 5. I'm your host, Emily Boss. I'm here on solo without Kev because I did a little interview with one of my old co-workers, Sunny Tash, where he talks about his side hobby, which is scratching, which he is very passionate about, and it's wonderful listening to someone talk about something they are truly passionate about and know all of the ins and outs of. It is wonderful and refreshing, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, just a spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie The Blair Witch Project, there is a spoiler in this episode. Also, if you do not know who Luke's father is from the Star Wars movies, go stop this right now and go watch the first original 3 movies of the Star Wars franchise and then come back to this and press play, because otherwise you're going to find out who Luke's father is in this episode. I've warned you. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode with Sunny Tash. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Sunny?
I work in the broadcast entertainment industry. I'm a 30 some odd year, 35 years, something like that.
Awesome. And so I have you on the show today because you have a very interesting hobby outside of your 9 to 5 job. Do you want to talk about how you got into it and how you got started and what really piqued your interest about DJing and scratching?
Yeah. How I got into it. Well, I like a lot of people of my age, I'm in my mid 40s, and like a lot of people my age who were listening to the hip hop scene in those early days, like in the late 80s or even early 80s. And so on, scratching was just kind of starting to emerge, and it was a really interesting sounding thing. I grew up in a music household. Both my mother and my stepdad professional musicians. My father also a musician, a professional musician too, more of a graphic artist, a visual artist, as an animator, and still doing a lot of visual art, but also still doing a lot of professional musicianship, playing. So as a result, I was raised around a lot of music, especially roots music, American roots music, blues, and a lot of vinyl culture. And so it was a very vinyl heavy household. My stepdad collected old 45s and things like that, and would just like spend all day either playing piano or listening to records. So I grew up in a very vinyl friendly household. And so when I was listening to a lot of this music, vinyl and vinyl manipulation kind of caught my attention, as it did for a lot of people. The early scratching sounds were everyone was just like, what the heck is that? Because we heard this thing happening and nobody really knew what it was. We could see people doing things, we didn't know what they were doing. And at some point I just got it in my head that I wanted to try doing it. I'd sort of picked up some other instruments, a few other things, and with usually fairly only marginal success, despite growing up in the household of a pair of pianists. I didn't really take to the piano too well. I had a kind of basic understanding, but wasn't that great at it. But for some reason, I kind of turned onto this. So I got into it. I managed to get myself some very low cost equipment early on, just like a single turntable and a mixer, because I really was actually from the outset, I didn't quite so much have an interest in DJing, but I had a great interest in scratching. So I just picked up like a mixer and a turntable, not knowing any better as to what to get. Very cheap, awful gear, and tried it out for a while until I realized that I actually kind of wasn't kidding about it. I was really into it. I really enjoyed what I was trying out, and so I went to a fairly serious equipment shop and said, "This is kind of what I want to do." And they sold me my first set of like serious equipment, and away I went.
And I know, like anyone else who's interested in doing DJing and scratching, how much are you looking to spend if you're looking to start out? Like if you were just to have like a small basic setup just to play around in your basement, how much do you think that would range? Like how much do you think people would be looking at?
I mean, it's a funny one. As a favorite expression of mine, it's like, how long is a piece of string? It kind of depends on what you're trying to do, or how much you're willing to put up with, or what you're trying to accomplish with it. So like it really changes. If you're trying to kind of get a more traditional DJ setup, it gets quite expensive because you're looking at some pretty serious equipment, and it can get quite pricey. But if you just really kind of want to get the say the core experience of scratching, you have these wonderful options nowadays because of a kind of, scratching is kind of a subculture of, I mean, hip hop is a culture. DJing as an activity is a subculture of that. A lot of people consider hip hop to break down into these kind of 4 fundamental elements. DJing is one of them, and scratching is a subculture of DJing. And within that, there are all of these subcultures that exist. And one of those is a scene we call portablism or portablism, which is just centered around portable scratching, really. I mean, portable DJing, you can kind of grow it out to that, but what it actually had its root in was portable scratching. And a portable setup, which essentially is down to a very cheap, low-cost portable turntable, a turntable that's actually designed to, originally they were designed for you to be able to go out and listen to records, especially if you were hunting vinyl. So they would be battery powered. They would have their own little speakers on them, a little volume knob and stuff like that. And people started taking these and adapting them to scratch with. They don't do that well. They don't sound that good. But if you're just looking to kind of be able to practice and have the physical experience of moving the record forward and backward and turn the sound on and off, there exploded this like big subculture of portable scratching and portable turntablism. And you can do that really cheaply. You can do it for like under easily under $500, maybe even less. You basically run the beats off your phone and use these little portable turntables. You can get one of those for about $200 if you want to spend a lot of mods to get them really amped up to quite high performance machines. You can actually spend a bit of cash on them, but you can get started for like even under $200 and you're up and running.
All right. So when I was going through your social media, I noticed something called You DJ. And when I first talked to you about it, I thought you were a part of it, but you were actually a student. Do you mind going into what that is for anyone who might be interested in becoming a DJ and scratching?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I'm both a part of it and I'm a student of it, a former student of it, I guess I could say. I'm kind of like a teacher of it, a professor now. I don't do much actual teaching, but, I'm part of the educational process and part of the setup with the group. So it was a school established by a guy by the name of Lee Chung and the Vinyl Killer, and he is he's a longtime DJ scratcher, a very top level performer, really amazing sound, but above all else, like an amazing teacher and educator. And communicates in a really wonderful way and helps a lot of people in Toronto and the greater Toronto area and even beyond there have kind of benefited from his excellent teaching style. So I met Lee at the time he was working. He's amongst his sort of jobs that he takes on as a heavy involvee of the DJ community is that he's known as like the turntable repair person in the Southern Ontario region. I'd say the Ontario region and a lot of other places. I've never met anybody who can just rip these things apart, and he'll do it right in front of you too. You'll be out at a gig and he'll just be like, "Oop, this head shell's off," and like out comes a screwdriver and the whole thing is like field stripped faster than you could believe. You turn back around and the whole thing is just like laying in parts on the floor. He's just got it cleaning and he's realigning, and then you turn back, and the whole thing is put back together again and it's in perfect working condition. You're just like, what the fuck? I spilled a whole beer on that thing. Anyway, so Lee is a great repair person. He was working for a long time or working for a while with Moog Audio, which is a really excellent audio equipment company, originally I think based in Montreal, but they've had another outlet in Toronto for a very long time. And Lee used to work with them and still is associated with that bunch. But and that's where I met him actually there when I was there buying what we nowadays we call the as my man Butterfingers calls it, one of the unicorns, these sort of funny little pieces of turntablist technology that have kind of appeared over the years, usually made by a company that was called Vestax. They're out of business now, but for a long time, this company called Vestax was making these just preposterous pieces of equipment that were very much exclusive to turntablists, and nobody else really wanted to buy these things. And I was out at Moog Audio trying to buy one of these things. And with scratchers, as with a lot of subcultural communities, the second you kind of, say or do certain things that give people the impression you're kind of into that thing, you get a bit of a sly eye, and they start kind of probing for more information. They're like, "Oh, you're into this, huh? All right, let's see what your story is." Anyway, and so he kind of started pulling that on me, and he was like, "Hey, if you're buying this thing, like, are you into scratching? Like, because it's kind of the only person who would buy this particular thing." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Hey, well, I got a little scratch DJ school thing that I do. I teach people, blah, blah, blah." Handed me his card. And I was very much at a point when I was starting to actually do some live performances with a musical group that we ran for a little while, this sort of failed band, but it was kind of designed to be a failed band called the Piranha Brothers. And I was the scratch DJ for it. And I knew at the time that my skills were not really up to par for the gig, but I did it anyways. But I really wanted to kind of advance myself further and faster, because I was having to, because the great thing about DJing, especially when you do it out, is like you're in front of people. So you just figure, man, I got to get my shit together because I don't want to suck. And especially with scratching and turntablism, like a lot of turntablism is done in front of other turntablists. So, like the competitive scene, the DMCs or the IDAs or any of these kind of competitions, the vast majority of the audience, and it's true to this day almost on any platform, the vast majority of people, a lot of people who are going to go out and see like DJ Cuber, one of the all-time greatest scratchers, scratch, are going to be other scratchers. Like that's who you're talking to yourself. Basically, it's an echo chamber. But I mean, that implies a lot of things. But one of the big ones is that the audience knows if you're awful. Like they all uncommon to a lot of, it's not like a lot of people, who would go and see Jimi Hendrix could also play guitar. Like they might want to, but they couldn't. They could just be into rock. But it's very rare that a lot of people are going to go and see like a Mixmaster Mike show. I mean, maybe Mixmaster Mike not as much, but like it's very rare a lot of people are going to go and see like D Styles or DJ Kubert who don't themselves actually scratch, at least as aspirationally, like they might have pieces of gear. So, I really wanted to kind of amp up everything I was doing, just because I knew like if I was going to get serious about it or do anything real, like the vast majority of people I was going to be speaking to were people who did this, and they'd know better. They'd know if I sucked. And so I took him up on his offer to teach, and became involved. And I don't know, after about 2 or 3 years or so, he was just like, "You're not really my student anymore. It's more like, let's just get together and scratch." And so we just kind of spent time together. We'd make little videos, or we would, sometimes I would come by with other students when they were around, and I would kind of just help instruct or just observe or whatever. And then at a certain point, this very famous event took place at Harbourfront Center about six years ago, something like that. Harbourfront in Toronto. Harbourfront Center was having a music festival, kind of an electronics music festival, and they made us part of it. Lee got us like a room, a really big room actually, for a big UDJ setup. So we set up a bunch of turntables, a bunch of digital control mechanisms, and regular vinyl, as many as we could basically get going, and set up a bunch of workstations, and then just invited people to come by. And everybody that was kind of peripherally involved with UDJ school at the time showed up to basically act as teachers for it, as sort of mentors. And so anybody could, any age range, whoever it was, didn't matter. If you came in, you were just interested in seeing what was going on. And so it was great, because it was like either we get to talk about scratching or we just scratched. Like if nobody was around, we would just scratch. And if somebody was around and wanted to talk about it, we'd talk about scratching. And it was awesome. And what came out of that was us starting to do monthly live events. Lee kind of worked out a deal with a venue where he would kind of be their in-house like turntable technician. He would make sure that they had turntables, that they were well maintained, sometimes look after some of their house audio system as well. And then the trade-off was we just get access to the venue, and we just get to go in and once a month set up our little workstation at a kind of a non-optimal time, like, you know, a Saturday afternoon before like people are going to show up, and we just do our little events, inviting other scratch DJs to show up. We set up all the gear and let it happen. And so that's kind of been what we've been doing for several years. So Lee still teaches, Lee still does his thing, and then the kind of big event is this kind of communal gathering that we do once a month now we do it at Rivoli. So last Saturday of every month at Rivoli, we hold a little open turntable scratch session. We invite both people who are just interested and people who are deeply involved and people who just want to be bothered by aggravating sounds for 4 hours to come by and enjoy.
And now when you do these events, would you find that scratching is still a little bit underground, or do you think it's becoming a little bit more mainstream now?
The way that I do also work with another. I've been doing less so lately, but I'm still involved with School of Scratch, based out of England. A DJ over there, Emma Shorty. She has an online scratch school called School of Scratch, schoolofscratch.com, and one thing that we really push, a point that we push home very forcefully, is like, you know, there's no wrong way to come at this thing. Like my own personal definition is this: like, scratching is really about two fundamental components. One is some kind of a sound, irrespective of the medium, that is being moved, that is being generated by a forward and backward motion with one hand, and that sound being turned on and off with the other hand. And that's pretty much it. And even that has like a little bit of play. There's like other things you can do with the other hand or the one hand. I mean, the very famous routine by the Scratch Perverts way back in the 90s, where they all came out and did an entire vinyl-free battle routine as a group. They all took the records off very famously. Like, they started out kind of looking like it's going to be a regular routine, and then they all take the records off the turntables and they do all these weird things, creating like feedback loops by looping things back into each other, so create like tones, and they would manipulate them, and they would like flick the records to make a you know, or they'd thump on the turntable to make like a kick sound, and they would flick on the needle in order to make a snare sound. Like all this wild stuff, just really incredible. And it's still turntables, it's still scratching. Like, it's you know, being wild and out there. So long story short, the way we think about it is to say, however you're going to approach this thing, and of course, you know, sometimes you go too far with it. You can go so vague with your description that it's like, what does this even mean? But at the end of the day, my theory is, look, you're trying to push a sound around with one hand, you're trying to turn that sound on and off with the other hand, and that's basically scratching. And any way you approach it, that's going to be that. So, definitions aside, and button pushing and all of that kind of concept notwithstanding, do I think it's actually picking up popularity? Not the thing that we do. And what I would say to that is that, I mean, yes and no. Like, you could say that there's more people who are involved or interested, but it's always going to be, we're always going to be on the small end of a scene for a couple key reasons. One is that it's hard to understand what we're actually physically doing. Like, most people, they kind of see what's going on, but they don't have a concept in their minds as to the process. Like, if you watch a person pluck a guitar string, you understand that their physical motion is causing tone to be generated. And if you see their finger moving up and down the fingerboard, then you get the impression that somehow there is a correlation between the actual tone that's being heard, like the frequency that you're hearing related as notes, and their physical motion. With scratching, it's way less obvious as to what's actually going on. So I think we're always kind of alienated from popularity by the sheer fact that it's just like, whoa, what's this? And the second thing that kind of alienates us is that the whole activity has gone pretty far afield in its nerdiness, like to an extent where not only does it help, but it's almost necessary that you have an active vocabulary in the activity itself in order to enjoy it. Which, I mean, my old theory of art, what that actually says is that essentially a thing is doomed. Like any kind of art form that requires that you as the recipient also speak its language is kind of a dead art, because it's an art that's not trying to communicate with the masses. And to me, it's like, that's the point of art. Art should be communicative. It should be speaking to everyone. It shouldn't be selective. It shouldn't be excluding people. So by that pure definition, nasty definition that I've created, you know, in theory, scratching is already dead. But that being said, like, a lot of people still do it, and a lot of people are still into it, and you can even see numbers grow. So I mean, I'm clearly wrong about something. But long story short, like, and you see it a lot with new people as an example. That and I know it myself too. It's like I'll listen to a lot of things that I used to think were really, really amazing, and I'll see, like, you know, relatively new people to the scene, and they'll be like, oh, you're all so great, and I'll be like, well, that guy's not that great. No, I mean, I'm maybe like, you're great, but that guy over there is terrible. What are you talking about? And I'll realize, and in my own view as well, like listening back to people that I used to think were really fantastic, really talented, really able at it, and listening to them again more recently, I'll think like, boy, I was really wrong. Like, they're actually practically incompetent at it, but my standard was very different. My ear for it has really changed, and the specifics I'm listening for have adjusted. And what you realize is, like, it's not that people are terrible. It's just like they're experienced or they're not experienced, and they're kind of coming along. We're all on a journey. We're all like growing and getting better at this. All of us who do this thing are growing and getting better at it. But as a result, you get pretty in the woods with your technical capability and your ability to comprehend what is technically happening. So, you know, a regular person and a professional basketball player are going to look at a game and see two very, very different things happening. And that's not necessarily alienating to the audience, because there's a fundamental drama playing out. But with scratching, there's nothing else but this one aggravating sound happening. There's no other drama there to kind of engage an audience. It's just that one sound. So the most you're going to get out of it is a very, very high level of technical appreciation, or a lot of like mid-range screechiness that's going to make you want to plug your ears after about 15 minutes. And we'll sit there and listen to this stuff for hours. Hours and hours. We'll just all sit there and drink and watch each other and go, this is fucking great. And other people are just like, when are they going to stop, actually? Because this is awful. So, you know, as a sound, like, it's certainly always there. It's a thing that's going to, you know, show up. It had its heyday, like appearing in rock acts in like the late 90s, and that certainly went away. And some people will genuinely do some really creative and interesting things with it. Do I think it's ever going to kind of have its day? I have my doubts, just because I kind of feel like if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. I don't think it ever, again, like, I just think there's a part of it that's a little too mysterious to people as to what it is that's happening. And it doesn't do itself any service, because there's a mystery kind of built into it that makes it automatically not obvious what is physically involved in the activity. So people just kind of go, huh, that sounds kind of cool, I guess. And they shrug their shoulders, and then they walk off and they listen to something else.
Yeah. Now, before we continue, I just want to ask a question that I've always wondered about scratching.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you still have a needle, obviously,
yes,
on the record. And like, you went into detail about how you can actually use it for the different sounds and stuff. But I mean, are you scratching the vinyl when, like, if you have like a really good like record in front of you, are you literally scratching the plastic on the vinyl record itself?
Oh, yeah, that's the best part. I mean, ephemerality is really at the core of the whole activity. It's kind of a joy. I made a video. I'll flip you the link for it. It's pretty funny. But I used to do this little kind of article. I just didn't have the time to really keep it up, but it was called "This Week in Spurious Scratch History," and it was it was trying to communicate. This is a very long setup. Get ready to get comfortable. Anyway, it was because back in the day when I was kind of getting started in it, We didn't like, there was no such thing as really social media, not certainly not in this form. There was like barely the early days of sort of the internet. So there was some communication between people online, but there's nothing like what we had now. And so a lot of people would be physically outlying from the major centers that all hip hop culture in its early generation was taking place, in places like New York and Bay Area and San Francisco and things like that, especially where turntablism was really starting to take off. And as a result, you could be deeply into the thing, but you didn't have a lot of avenues to get involved. So most of us did it through mail order stuff that we could just buy. So, and what I was finding was that I was getting involved with these educational groups, especially School of Scratch, that I would be talking with these like new students who were kind of getting involved in it. And I would reference things that I thought were just kind of like common to the culture. And they go, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, how can you not know what I'm talking about? Like, this is absolutely critical to our history. And then I realized, oh, you know, it's funny. It's like these people kind of show up and now these things, like, we don't talk about them all the time, and they don't have there's no like kind of, you know, there's no like Wrigley feels like there's no like kind of big thing that says, hey, these are the historical things you need to kind of know about if you're just going to get involved in this thing. Like, you wouldn't ever not know. But to my mind, it's like, how you could ever be involved in turntablism and not know what like Wave Twisters the movie is just baffling to me. But I mean, but to a person who's just coming at it, it's like, well, who's there to kind of tell you that? Nobody. So I thought, oh, you know, well, I'll write it. And so I basically created this whole article around how really the early days of Scratch community was actually built out of just stuff, the little things, which at the time, not only would you acquire it, but those were those markers of like, oh, I'm dealing with a scratcher because this person knows about this object because they went and mail ordered it from the exact same place I did. And even though I live here in Toronto and that person lives down in Chicago or whatever, like, we both look at each other and kind of smile and wink and nod. And it's like, oh, you're an idiot too. Like, nobody wants to invite you to the party. So anyway, and one of the articles that I did them about all sorts of objects that I just thought were really interesting. And more about it, it was kind of talking about scratching and turntablism history and scratching specifically. But what it was really more talking about is kind of trying to address like the broader history in the context of this object, to just kind of take this object as a bit of a launch pad. And one of the ones I went into is the very early generation of what we used to call battle records, which was again another subcultural scene of turntablism that grew up out of the early days of, or sort of not early days, kind of silver age, let's say, of scratch competitions, battle competitions out of the DMCs and things like that. And people would make these custom records that were designed specifically to battle with. So they're not listening records, they're scratching records, they're battling records. So they would be, instead of having to, as a battle DJ, go through a whole bunch of records, you made these special, you as a competitive DJ, you actually made these special records and then sold them to other DJs that would have all of the things that you would kind of need all put onto one piece of vinyl. So instead of having to get this little sample of this thing over here and that little beat of section of beat over there and then have two of them to juggle with and you just made one record and you kind of put all that information onto that one record and you home pressed it, and the whole cottage industry blew up. I mean, blew up in our terms, blew up around this kind of concept. Anyway, so I play this one record. It's by a very famous battle DJ and creator of a lot of music named DJ Rectangle, who's still very active today. And I played this record. It's a yellow piece of vinyl. Like I say, I'll send you the link because I made this little video to go with it, and it's so much fun because like so the big thing to note here is that there's a particular sound that all the DJs scratch, and it's of a Fab Five Freddy album, a single called Change the Beat. And on the flip side of it, there's a sound at the very end, which you'll know if you hear it. And it's Fab Five Freddy himself talking through a vocoder that's adapting his voice to have this kind of hissy electronic sound. And he says, this stuff is really fresh. But the way that the sounds and the fresh sounds, it became a big thing to scratch. Herbie Hancock scratched it very early on, and or had the sound of it scratched in some of his music very early on. So it kind of became this like this real, sort of flashpoint for a lot of scratchers. And to this day, the only thing that they scratch. Like, we'll buy all these albums, we'll get all these like battle records or skip proof albums, and they're like, yeah, I just want to get this album. It's like, what, really? Do you need to buy another album with ah on it? Like, that's all you want? It's just ah sound. Like, I spend like thousands of dollars on battle records just for one frigging sound over and over and over again. Anyway, so I went to my original album that had that ah sound on it, and it's like stuck right in the middle of the record. But I used to go to it so much that I could needle drop to like pretty much bang on every single time blind. Like, I could just move my needle to right over where I knew it was going to be, drop that needle onto the album, and boom, it was right there on the ah, because I knew exactly where it was. And I play it, and it sounds like, it goes like, like, because the opening part of it has been ground out to nothing. So that is my whole setup and answer to your question is yes, you are actually basically moving a needle inside of a groove of a piece of plastic, which is not real. None of it is, I mean, the needles are kind of designed to actually move forward and backwards, as opposed to listening needles that are not designed to go in both directions. Mm-hmm. Scratching needles actually do, like the stylus itself, the tip of the stylus itself does actually have a design to it that is supposed to promote less wear on the groove of the record. But long story short, you move a thing forward and backwards enough times, it's going to take on sound, not to mention dust, cracks, physical handling, doing literally everything that a certain generation knew to never, ever, ever do with a vinyl record. We not only do, but delight in. And that brings with it a natural ephemerality to the media itself. We are basically damaging everything we get. So everybody used to buy multiple copies because you knew you were going to fuck one up. Like, especially if you were competing with it, you would like have your practice copies and then you have your like playback copies. But even then, it's not a good idea to just play your practice copy. You kind of want to wear it in a little bit, because if you have like a totally fresh record and you try to scratch with it, even though you've got another copy and you scratch all the time and you're perfect with it, you play out that new copy or that new needle for as can happen as well, and it doesn't work. Like, your needle skipping all over the place. It's because it's not like you need it just a little grooved in. You need it to be dug in just a little bit in order to make that scratch work just right, and to deal with how heavy-handed you might be or whatever. So it's a like, yeah, we actually delight in the fact that it's an ephemeral media that we work in, and we're destroying it as we are delighting in it. There's something
you guys are vinyl monsters.
Yeah, we're vinyl monsters. We're like, literally, when Lee calls himself a vinyl killer, like, that is what we are. We destroy the objects, the thing that we love the most, as we all do in life. So there's your lesson for the day. Interview's done. I'm out. Thank you.
Mic drop. So you sort of touched on before how the School of Scratch and you DJ and battle records and different DJing and scratching battles. Now, can you discuss the distinction between DJing as a broad concept and the sub-communities of turntablism, your focus specifically, and the unique subcultures and the subcultures that you've been discussing that have all come out of this one sort of, it sounds like a hobby, but it sounds like more of a skill that you have to take on, because it does sound like it takes quite a bit of practice. And obviously you have to get comfortable with all of your equipment and the needles and actually like digging holes into your records to sort of build up your skills.
Yeah, it's true. And money and time and all of it just to do anything, just to even, I mean, it's not an easy thing to take on in the first place, right? Like, you're doing a thing that's not, unlike a lot of other instrumentation. Well, I mean, some instruments are kind of like it. Not many I've found that are exactly like it, where the two hands are doing things that are, I mean, I suppose it's arguable, really, any instrument is along similar lines. String instruments are kind of the most similar, I guess you could say, insofar as you're doing two very different things with your hands, but the speed at which you have to kind of do it is pretty atypical of most instruments. Anyway, so it's an unusual thing to take on, and so you do have to spend a lot of time. So the fact that people get into it at all is a little mystifying. But anyway, yeah. So essentially, I mean, DJing is DJing as a performance thing, the way that we kind of think of it these days, really just kind of it came out of obviously radio disc jocks, but a live event disc jockeying as the concept of pressed vinyl really came in as a thing to do. Obviously radio stations were playing it, but then the idea of how could you get this gear like small and portable enough that instead of having a band show up at an event, that you could actually just have somebody playing all the hit records live out. And so equipment goes through generational changes as the demand increases, and people usually hack whatever is available to them to make it work. And generally speaking, that's kind of the cycle of things. Of pretty much everything I'm going to say is like somebody kind of took what was there in front of them, they hacked the thing, and then a manufacturer somewhere saw a marketing opportunity and built something to satisfy that hack and make the hack no longer necessary. And that's pretty much what's happened throughout the whole cycle of the thing. So you had kind of early dance hall people, folks playing like reggae and stuff like that. And the big one that really, dance hall was a very big contributor to what would eventually become kind of hip hop DJing and the way that we think about DJing nowadays. But also disco was really the big one. And you laugh, and a lot of people will kind of give it a bit of short shrift. But I don't know if you've ever seen the series, The Get Down, but not necessarily a historically accurate overview of the background of hip hop and the four elements, but a very spiritually accurate one that really kind of catches the vibe of kind of what was going down and the way that we thought about it and the way a lot of people thought about it. But anyway, the idea was that the fundamental idea is that you have and what it really grows up out of, and it has to do with disco itself specifically. A lot of it doesn't happen without disco and the format of the music, because unlike a lot of its predecessors like rock and really anything jazz, all of these kind of fundamental musical forms, especially American musical forms, one characteristic of disco that was not shared amongst a lot of its predecessors was a very strong commonality from song to song. Like pretty much all disco music is the beat structure is identical. It's almost always 4/4 2/4 time, and and it's almost always the same tempo. Like the beats per minute and the meter of the song, they're always the time signature of the song are always pretty much identical, which is to say that if you're going to play this music in a public performance way or on a radio, you have this opportunity to keep the beat going. And if your interest is really in making a dance party dance, then you want to keep that beat going for as long as you can with very little variation. You don't want to stop it too much because you want people to keep on dancing. And if you want people to keep on dancing, you're going to want to have a smooth transition from one song to another. And as it happens, most disco is within a very limited beat per minute range, and most of it is all this exact same time signature, which means it very smoothly and easily blends from one record to the next. So a whole bunch of technology emerges as a result of that function and the desire to kind of keep the beat going. And amongst those things are simple little things like a pitch adjustment on a turntable that would allow you to actually change the speed of the record within, a small amount, but just enough that when you had a bunch of tempos that were relatively similar, that little pitch adjustment of plus minus 8% on a Technics turntable could allow you to get two beats blending into one another. As you brought one in and let the other one go out, you wouldn't be able to tell that a new song had even started unless you happen to know, like, hey, that's the new song. And things like even, a very special one would be the ability to monitor the incoming audio in a way that the audience could not hear it, but you, the disc jockey, could hear it. So cue monitoring would be a very key concept built into the technology of the actual mixers that were being used to mix the signal of the two turntables. But a really key one, especially to scratching, is the crossfader, which is, again, like it's a very simple functional device that at first it's not obvious what it does or why it would do that. But if you were ever a disc jockey who was trying to start and again, a lot of this has to do with disco and a lot of it has to do with like early dance music, but when you're playing a disco song and you want it to smoothly blend in at exactly the right time, you can't just start a record, hope that the beat comes in at the right time, and then start bringing up the audio channel of the thing, because, where did that record start? Like, no, you're going to actually have to grab that record, and you're going to have to hold that beat at that certain point and then release the record and then start bringing up the volume on that channel. Well, if you're doing the math so far, you've got audio that has to come down on the record that's going out and audio that has to come in on the record that's coming in. So that's 2. And then you've got to have that hand that's holding the record that's actually releasing it. That's 3 hands. So far you're down 1 hand. So unless you or your head, some other object, or you've got a friend, you're fucked. And so you need this extra hand. And then the crossfader appears, and it does this one job. It brings the volume of the outgoing record down while it brings the volume of the incoming record up. So it takes those 2 hands that were used to be controlling those 2 channels, and it makes it happen with just 1 fader. And between that, and so then you could cue the record with using your cue monitor, so you could listen to the record that the people couldn't hear, and you could move the record to be at that start point of that beat where you needed it to be, and you could have the channel turned off because it was pushed all the way over to the other turntable side, the outgoing audio, and then you could slowly start moving it over, opening up the channel while you release the record at exactly the right time, and boom, you're a fucking DJ. So that's the birth of kind of DJing, and a lot of the technology that generationally changed that kind of led to this thing. And then you have this guy in this apocryphal story, Grand Wizard Theodore, who's listening to his mom yelling at him while he's playing records very loudly in his bedroom, and he's practicing, and he's kind of got the record and he's just cueing it while he's listening to his mom yelling at him, but he's kind of not listening to his mom yelling at him. And as the story goes, he's just kind of, part of his brain goes, hey, here I am cueing this record like I would usually be doing, but it kind of has a sound all by itself because you're doing it in time. Like you move the record forward and backwards while you're cueing, and the audience can't hear you doing it. You're moving the record forward and backwards just to stay in time with this music, so that you make sure that when you release the record, it's on the right time. So you do it in time, and as a result, you're making a sound. You're adding to the polyrhythmic spectrum of the music, and basically everything emerges out of this one concept. So instead of you not hearing it because it's happening in the cue monitor, you just open that channel and let people hear that sound of you cueing the record. So what it started to become was just a little tool in any mixing DJ's sort of box of weapons that they would have at their disposal to mix. So you could just bring the audio in. You could also like open up the channel, and you could just scratch the audio in by just moving the record forward and back, or do it da, and away it goes. We used to have a buddy we called the DJ Stop Drop and Roll, and he would just like he would kind of like start the other record, and he would take the other record, turn the power off, and backspin it really fast. That was just like another weapon in the arsenal, you know. But you want to have like all these kind of things you could do. You could fade down the other channel. You could play all these tricks, and a lot of turntablism really grew out of this fundamental concept of how do I just mix these records together. But scratching became a sound all unto itself that started to become a feature player, as became less about mixing disco and more about mixing this other musical form that was really embracing this concept of mixing records together, which was emerging as hip hop. That was, especially at the time, largely also sampling. I mean, it was taking some from disco records, but it was also taking a lot from funk, because they found that there was this little nugget, this little window inside a lot of these funk records where a lot of the instrumentation would start to drop away, and they would, quote unquote, as James Brown said, they would give the drummer some. Like, you would just give this drummer this moment to kind of have a little breakdown thing where you would feature them, just like you would do in traditional jazz, where each instrumentalist would kind of have their opportunity to shine. So like, there would just be a little bit of instrumentation, maybe a little horn hit or a little guitar lick or something like that. But otherwise, it was really just about the drummer going off. And as a result, there was this little moment where you could and people would like love it. They would flip out because it was like this really dancey, super awesome moment when, you'd kind of have to say it. So the idea was like, hey, what if you could extend that moment? What if you could make that little thing that just lasted about 4 bars or whatever, and just grow it out a little bit more? So what if you just took 2 copies of that record and you found that point where the one started, and you waited for the other one to just about to end, and the rest of the band's about to kick in, but before they get the chance to, boom, you swing in the second copy, starting at the same point where that break started, that break in the record, the break when the rest of the instrumentation took a break. And there's your break, this beautiful little moment. And then you have, a person who might be the DJ themselves, but it could also be another person who is just there kind of keeping the party going, amping it up. And so they would be talking on a microphone over top and talking while the record is playing. And then suddenly, next thing you know, they're saying rhymes, they're keeping the party going, and there you have MCing. And so these two things kind of start to grow up out of each other. This DJ who's moving these records back and forth and just keeping that break going, and the MC who's talking over top, rapping, and trying to just keep the party going. And that might be the same person, might be the DJ themselves who's doing this. But really, you have here the birth of hip hop, of the music side of hip hop, anyways, the two of the four elements. And so all of this kind of filters down to the battling scene. And the next phase of turntablism and where it's going to kind of go as it develops comes out of that battle scene. And all of its subsequent, a lot of its subsequent technological advances end up really being born of either people who are actively involved in it, or people who became sort of legendary in it and then tried to kind of drive the scene forward. So fundamental turntablism kind of comes out of that, the idea that somebody is, instead of just crafting beats or finding beats to use as a backup to MCs, doing it just for themselves in their own right becomes its own whole scene. So taking these records and not just looping it, but what we would call beat juggling, which is to say you start to take smaller portions. You're not just looping, like, say, 8 bars of a thing or even 1 bar of a thing. You're taking like the initial kick and snare, and then you're bringing in like a snare from a later point in the beat. So you're actually recrafting a new beat out of 2 copies of the same beat, or even copies of different beats, like the 2 pieces of different beats, to mix them up into a whole new sound just off of 2 disparate parts of this record. And juggling becomes juggling is a fundamental aspect of competitive DJing that becomes critical to the sort of birthplace of turntablism as an independent concept itself from just straight DJing, where you're just going out to a party playing records. No, you're actually taking those records and you're starting to really manipulate how they're actually played, and you do it through these very small, what we would call routines, that you put together. So they're designed to be competitive routines. They don't last that long. They'll be like, a couple minutes. They could be 5-6 minutes, or you might cobble them together. You might have little subsections, like you have little parts, and you piece them all together into like a greater routine, depending on how many records you're willing to flip through. So that kind of becomes a scene all unto itself, just juggling, and using it specifically in a competitive. And it doesn't have a ton of application outside of the competitive scene. Not a lot of people, again, listen to it or know it or understand what's going on, and certainly not enough to kind of be into it any more than they would anything else. Like, they don't kind of listen to this and go, I don't even know, like, everybody's kind of throwing their hands up and screaming at a point, and it's like, it's like going to a Roman Catholic ceremony for the first time. You're just like, I don't know why they're all suddenly saying amen, but they seem to all know exactly when to say amen. Like, and I would never have known that if I wasn't Catholic. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that. Like, people suddenly all start screaming at a scratch event. And you're like, what the fuck are they all screaming about? This guy just suddenly played the beat slower. And he's like, no. He's taken this beat and he's kind of manipulated and cut it into such a way that it's a fundamentally like a one time signature or a one particular tempo song, and he's actually stopping and starting the record to make it a whole other tempo, and that takes a lot of very careful manipulation of the beat. So the internal communication thing really starts to kick in and starts to make it a very simultaneously inward focused and also kind of myopic like scene that is so like almost narcissistic. It's so obsessed with itself to the exclusion of the outside universe. Like, it really, and a cottage industry and several cottage industries really develop out of this, where people could actually like legitimately make a living off of creating or selling the creations of others things that are just dedicated to this and serve no practical other value besides satisfying a turntablist. And Battle Records are a great example of that, where it's not an album you would ever listen to. So Battle Records originally, they would kind of start out, they would be like, you would have like 1 or 2 beats on them, and then you would have like these things, we used to call them scratch sentences, which has a very different meaning these days. But back then, a scratch sentence was literally like a band of the record would just be like a bunch of sounds back to back, so oftentimes set to a fixed tempo, but it would just be like horn stab, and then a sample of somebody saying like motherfucker say what, and then fresh, and then like a kick and a snare, and then like, so that you could actually scratch, like you could drum scratch, like you could take the kick and the snare and you could actually scratch them into a beat and things like that. And that became like a format for Battle Records. But eventually digital vinyl started to become a thing, which was a scene involving because somebody kind of twigged to the fact that you could take a piece of vinyl and you could just encode it with a tone that could be interpreted as a time code signal. So you have a background in television, so you'd understand what I'm talking about. But like time code is an arbitrary concept, but it's just simply creating markers along any signal path, and that becomes a universal reference point for both the playback mechanism and the receiving mechanism. So and it's not actually time in the way that we think of time, but it's just an arbitrary set of markers that say now this, then this, then this, then this. So that's just numbers, right? Those are just numbers, arbitrary numbers that you can, so long as they're consecutive and they follow a sensible logic that you can mathematically calculate. Well, in theory, then you could take that information and you could have a computer process it. So if you just map a piece of audio, digital audio, onto that string of numbers, and then you have a piece of vinyl that has those numbers encoded on it, if you just create an audio processor in between the two, a digital, like an audio digital, analog to digital and digital to analog converter, it can take that analog signal, which is playing time code, feed it to the computer, which can take that signal as instruction for when to play a piece of digital audio that it has mapped to those exact same numbers, and then feed that information back out to that digital analog to analog, analog digital to digital analog converter, to feed that information back out to the mixer. So if you can create a fast enough processor to do it, it can happen in real time, so that you can take any piece of digital audio and map it onto a timecode piece of vinyl. So a whole scene emerges out of just that, just out of digital vinyl, which at first is rejected by the competitive community, and eventually it just takes over so much because people were sick of humping fucking records in milk crates. I can attest to that, having done several moves. What a painful experience that is. Like, drummers can complain about all their cases. Well, let me show you the back of any like DJ from the 80s and how much they had to put up with hauling fucking records around in milk crates. And as a point of interest, Canadian, when we switched over to metric system, kind of screwed everybody over because the milk crates are very slightly too small to handle records. We all took it personal. Everybody was like, fuck these guys. They were just trying to steal their record crates. Anyway, I think it's the metric system that screwed us over. Anyhow, so American milk crates, pretty valuable. Anyway, so that was another sort of thing that started to emerge as a thing, but as it didn't necessarily kill off the vinyl record scene, because other things started to happen. And one of the key, and a lot of people just like the manipulation, they like the ease, they like not having to plug a bunch of stuff in. So they like just being able to turn on their turntables and kind of get ripping, and they would be happy with it. And yet another kind of scene emerged out of that. It was a concept that I'm pretty sure DJ Swamp first pioneered, but I'm probably wrong about that. I'm wrong about almost everything I say. By the way, everything I said is a complete lie. Trust me or not. Anyway, DJ Swamp kind of came out with this very interesting idea that he had, because he used to play for rock bands, which of course was a very popular thing at the time, and he was into this really like heavy like thrash metal and all this kind of stuff. And he'd be dealing with these bands who would just be bouncing around on these like temporarily installed riser decks that were loose and bouncy, and as you can well imagine, that is counterproductive to a scratch DJ's job, where we need stability and a nice calm physical space to play in. When he would play with rock bands, that would go pretty haywire, and even just the bass thumps from the nearby amps could cause a needle to skip out of the groove. So he had this brilliant idea. He realized that there was a certain way, and I've had arguments with people about this as to how this plays out, but the way I know the method, and there are other people who know a different way to do this, the way I know the method is that if you take a sound and you lay it out on a 4/4 timeline in any audio editor, a music editor, and you set the tempo to a 133.33 beats per minute, and you set a series of sounds inside a bar, and then you repeat that set of sounds every bar, and then you press that information onto a piece of vinyl, what you get is what could be thought of as a skip-proof piece of vinyl. This is what DJ Swamp starts releasing, is these skip-proof albums. And all it is that there's a tempo, or some people also think of it as a certain time signature that magically maps onto a piece of vinyl perfectly, or semi-perfectly, so that when you rotate the record one revolution or any amount of revolutions, if you continue that sound going down and down and down the record, it will always hit at the pretty much exact same point of the sound, because the rotation is mapped perfectly by the tempo.
That's so cool.
It's so cool for nerds. So you've just let the cat out of the bag on your side, Em. Anyways. This becomes a whole subcultural scene itself, creating these what we used to think of as battle records, and now become these skip-proof records. So the battle record scene kind of dies, and the skip-proof record scene explodes. Again, small market explodes for us. And there's people to this day who are like wildly famous and well known in the community, and indeed make a pretty handsome living releasing these albums very, very regularly. So it's a whole subcultural scene all into itself, that kind of grows up just out of the nature of the technology and the interests of the people. And as I mentioned before, like portablism is very much a part of that too, where and it was a really early part of the scene, was an obsession with the idea of not having to hump all the shit with you to all of this stuff just to scratch. So to us, Qbert was like the god, and still is kind of the god of the whole scene, this kind of person who's reached this unreachable height of technical skill and creative ability. And he basically he does what he does, like just showing up and scratching. He doesn't do anything else. He can mix an entire show if he wants to, but he doesn't have to. He could just, show up and just scratch, and people will just show up and watch him scratch, and that's it. And there's not many people who you can say that about, like really deadly few. And I think if nothing else, tells the tale expresses the tale I am saying about what a limited audience there is out there for this sort of thing. Like there's really only about a handful of people that could show up and just scratch, and people would show up to just hear that and then nothing else. And Qbert's certainly one of them. One of his big things was just he could just show up and do that, and you're like, man, yeah, I want to do that. Like I want to just be able to show up places and just scratch, and I don't want to have to hump fucking gear, and I don't want to hump all the records and da-da-da. And it's difficult too, because it's like you gotta take the turntable and you gotta wire it into the mixer, and then you gotta figure out what's your beat coming from, wire that into the mixer, and chances are it was going to be another turntable, because what else were you gonna hump along? And it's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not as much stuff as drummers, but it's really fucking heavy, and it's a pain in the ass. And really, just to do all that to scratch, it feels like excessive and unnecessary. And Qbert worked with what used to be the big company that would build things for turntablists, especially a company called Vestax, like I mentioned before. Sadly went out of business, but before they did, they were really famous for making all of these very interesting things. And I mentioned I was out buying one of these unicorns of the industry when I met Lee, and it was one of these objects that Vestax had built, the one that they had built with Qbert, called the QFO, and it was designed to be a all-in-one 2-channel audio mixer and a turntable as one piece of equipment. And it was quite an intense little piece of gear, because it was heavy. It was heavy like a regular turntable and had all the functionality of a regular turntable, but also this 2-channel mixer that just made it like a dream. And they were very expensive, and they were very rare and very uncommon. And obviously what this was kind of speaking to was a very early desire for scratchers to turntablists generally, but scratchers specifically, because that whole scene kind of started to emerge. Like, and maybe I should back. Well, no, I won't back this up. But I mean, what this kind of spoke to was that there was a desire just for portability, like the desire to. I mean, the DVS thing was very much a part of it. Working with digital vinyl was really about like just carrying less stuff, and so too was a concept like the QFO as this idea, like, hey man, I just want to go out and scratch. And that was kind of another thing that emerged too, just as a thing itself, which I haven't really delved into, is like, as much as people were enjoying DJing, as much as they were enjoying juggling and turntablism and battling and all of these things that you could do, one of the things they really loved to do was just scratch. And that's the thing, is like, I could show you a bunch of guys who, like, they were battle guys back in the day. They're still performing today, still like active DJs right now today, and they might do other things. They might teach audio, they might do this, they might do that, but they're still actively scratching, still going out and doing like regular gigs. They might have like a little house thing that they're doing with some venue every week, or once a month or whatever. But at the end of the day, they all just want to scratch. Like, they really love this one particular activity, and they almost hate themselves for it, because they know nobody cares. They would never be able to show up at a venue and just do that for an hour or 2 hours. And that's a part of where our open turntable sessions, like our open scratch sessions, came from, was just kind of feeding into this desire, or playing into this desire, that most people who are into it, all they want to do is scratch. So scratching alone actually drives, I'm going to say, like about 80, maybe even higher percentage of the cottage industry built around turntablism. DJing as a general concept, turntablism is a specific subcultural concept, and certainly like scratching as the subcultural concept. That alone drives the vast majority of the cottage industry activity that takes place. Is really just about scratching. It's not even about turntablism as a broader concept involving other things you could do with turntables and vinyl. It's really just about scratching. And so, the portabilism scene kind of came up out of that, like, where it was just like, they realized they had these little like portable record players that you could take with you, and it was really designed. I mean, it served a lot of purposes, but one of the key ones was, and it's not like it didn't have a history. Like, there's like a concept of these little portable turntables that you can go back to, like, the old like dance sets from Woolworths and things like that. Like, people at RC had been making them for years and years, but Vestax actually made one, which was it was built to look like a little suitcase. Mm-hmm. And it was meant for you to be a crate digger. Like, you could go out to like a flea market or whatever, and before you bought that like $2 piece of cheapo vinyl, you could actually throw it on this turntable that was battery powered, and you could just listen and see did it have that sample that I needed? Did it sound any good? Does it crack? Does it crap? Is it too dirty to even bother? Is it too filled with mold to even be worth the $2 that the guy's asking for? Fuck that guy. Why is he trying to rip me off? Anyway. So this whole portablism scene kind of grew up just out of that. And then people just like, there's a company out there, and they just make little faders to feed these portable turntables into. Or like another company like said, hey man, why is Vestax the only company in the market? So this other company, Newmark, that makes also a lot of DJ gear. They're like, fuck those guys, man. We're going to get in on this market, because everything should always be a two company market, Apple versus PC, Apple versus Windows, and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so they make another turntable, and then they eventually make one that's specifically designed for scratching. It has a little, they call it the switch. Like, if you ever want to get a turntables mad, start talking about the switch. It's just this little switch. It's kind of supposed to be like a crossfader, but it's actually just like a toggle switch that's just loose. Oh. And you can use it. You can totally use it. But it's not easy, because it doesn't quite respond the same way as an actual conventional crossfader. So this other guy, like, he makes what he calls the crib, and it's just this little thing that's designed to take a little mini crossfader that another company makes. They make the custom crossfaders that you can install into any mixer, but it's just like a higher quality crossfader with customizable cut-in time so that you can make it cut just right. Oh, there's another piece of technology. It's like people changing the rate of amplitude that a crossfader moves at in order to accommodate scratching specifically. Like, that alone was an invention that was just designed for scratchers to be able to scratch. Because if you start to scratch in like the crossfaders, like at a slow ramping up speed, you can't scratch well, because the people can't hear it. Like, you got to move the fader like preposterously far over in order to hear the scratch coming in at full volume. So just changing a mixer to allow the amplitude of the incoming record to be at full volume the second you move the fader just a little bit in was like a fundamental technological advancement as part of mixers to serve scratchers specifically. So all of these things, these little mixers and faders and ways to mount them and blah, 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 like all this stuff like just ends up coming out of like these weird little sub cultural scenes kind of end up blowing up. And a lot of it has to do with gear just out of scratching alone and as a sort of jumping off point. And people are wildly into this stuff. Like there's a whole scene of people who just DIY mod portable turntables and build them to do all kinds of wacky things. They build like, you know, they rewire them for, you know, start stop buttons because otherwise like you just move the tone arm and the motor starts up. Well, what if you just want to like set the needle down and not have it actually turn on, you know, because you just want to leave the record there while another guy's scratching and then you start scratching. Like, you know, it's such fucking stupidly nerdy shit, but like having a start stop.
No, that stuff really interests me.
Yeah, like it interests us too. Like having a start stop button on your turntable is pretty fucking important. It's like, and like I'll pay a dude to do it. Like I traded a guy. I used to sell records. Like I used to sell like scratch vinyl, skip proof vinyl, and I just like gave the guy a record so he would like get out his drill and fucking mod up my turntable like a nerd. Anyway, so that's kind of the scene, is like a bunch of people who this is just and so many subcultural kind of subcultural scenes kind of grew up out of you know, DJing in the very broadest sense, turntablism as a more specific sense, and scratching as an even more specific sense. All of these things that kind of come up out of it, interest in equipment, specific ways to do it, things that serve the activity itself, like loopers. There's a whole scene of people who make apps that are meant to emulate loopers, because of course like loopers were built in Flash, and Flash was a specific undermining competition to the app-based, you know, monetization model of smartphones. So they all got disallowed. And I mean, they say, oh, it's because they're insecure and this, that, and the other ones. No, they're just challenging your monetization model, which is they're throwing their $2 at an app. Well, you know, $2 isn't a lot to throw in an app, but it sure is when there's like millions of apps out there. There's, you know, millions and millions of dollars to be lost if you let Flash kick around and be viewable through browsers. So they had to disallow them. So then a whole scene of people started like making apps that could emulate the activity of loopers, and they would just take existing loopers and extract the beats from them with the permission of the looper creator, and mount them in their app. So there's like a whole scene of that, of just people making these apps that can go on your phone, so you can plug your phone into your portable turntable and then go out and have a whole scratch session. Like I for the UDJ sessions, that's what I run everything off of, is off one of these like little looper apps that I just, you know, like, because Table Beats Looper by Daniel Hulth. Go get it. Table Beats. It's a great app. Fantastic app. Version 2. Oh, it's so great. Go get it. Plug. Tableless.net app. Tableless.net's the best. Great. Anyway, yeah. So loopers and apps and types of vinyl that are just for us. And a lot of like educational schools, online educational schools, has really been a bastion for, especially a lot of scratchers of a certain DJ generation. Like that ended up being like the real place that they could make money, was actually just teaching others, as is the case for so many kind of these sort of scenes. You know, it's like there's a lot of things where it's like that's actually like just teaching other people how to do stuff ends up being sort of the way that you can, you know, make a buck out of it and still be doing it. So that ended up becoming a big thing. So DJ Qbert has his school, the QS, what's used to be traditionally called the QSU, run on the ArtistWorks platform, and but it's out there, the Scratch DJ Academy, I think it's called, and there's another one run by the Beat Junkies out of California that are just fantastic. Theirs is a fantastic one. D Styles is a part of that, who's just an epic legend. Anyway, like the teaching thing became a whole scene unto itself, and it's pretty cool. And people doing like posting up their videos, and yeah, it's amazing. It just never ends, man. There's like, if you're, whatever your nerd thing is, if you get into scratching, man, we got you back. We got you. We can scratch that itch, if you will.
Now, I've heard you mention a lot of male names. Are there a lot of females in scratching and DJing too? Like, I know there's more female DJs now out there, but I mean, it's still primarily male. Like, do you find... Yeah, exactly. Sausage party. So do you find there's more females getting interested in it?
Yeah, I really do. Like, I mean, my you know, a very great friend and excellent scratcher and excellent educator, Emma, Shorty, who there's another Shorty as well, who is also a woman, a female scratch DJ and a competitive DJ. But this other Shorty, who's from England, Emma is a fantastic DJ, fantastic educator, and a fantastic how do I put it, like a point of inspiration for female DJs to be involved, because her message, her thesis is one of great inclusion, great welcoming, great outreach to really encourage anybody, like age ranges, background, experience, culture, and especially like gender of your choice, to become involved. And we try. It was part of why I wanted to be involved with her school, was her message of inclusion. I found to be, because I'm not there's kind of two ways you can really approach this thing, and a lot of it was really based out of a competitive background, and that nature kind of turned me off a lot in the early days. It's part of why I kind of wasn't involved in it early on, to be honest, and why I kind of kept quiet into my little cave troll mode about the whole thing, was that I just I liked the competitive scene. I liked watching the videos, and I liked the things that came out as a result of the competitive scene. But it was really driven by a lot of like tough talking guys, you know, flexing their muscles and shit talking each other, and I'm not that kind of guy myself, and I don't really do that sort of thing. I was never involved in sports. I was kind of that, you know, dumpy kid who just sort of
you were a nerd. It's okay.
I didn't want to play my Dungeons and Dragons. So, you know, not that sort of person. And so that part of it really turned me off. And when, you know, Emma came about with her idea for scratch school, and she wanted to talk to me a lot about like videography and stuff like that. We kind of started talking. How I got involved with the school was just helping her out with a lot of the video elements in the early days for her, which she does really wonderfully, because she really had a vision of a very high standard that she wanted things to hit, but you know, on a budget. Like, she really wanted to keep things cost efficient, and so I tried to help her kind of attain those goals, and she did a really brilliant job of it, where a lot of people were kind of skating by on pretty subpar audio quality and video quality, and she really wanted to kind of raise the bar on that, and I think she succeeded brilliantly. But her message of inclusion and encouragement brought a lot of people in, and we got a lot of female scratch DJs that were, or a lot of female scratchers that were just really interested, or just females that were women that were really interested in getting involved in it. And so I saw a lot through that group, but also just in my own experience of, you know, we in Canada have a great, excellent DJ, Kilojoule, who is just fantastic. And if you ever have the chance, if you're in the Montreal area, you have the chance to go out to their Sunday scratch sessions. They have them very regularly. Manzo and Kilojoule put those on, and she is a marvel to watch, and part of a growing excellent scene of female DJs. Some have had like sort of better success than others. Kitty Cuts out of New Zealand. There's so many that are fantastic. The other Shorty, people who are doing really fantastic work, and definitely I think that there's a lot more opportunity and acceptance. You don't see them as involved in the competitive community as certainly I would wish to see. Sometimes that, I think, boils down to maybe not as much encouragement as ought to be there. I think people maybe try, and I think there's also just a sheer intimidation factor. It's like you see that sausage party and you're like, fuck, I wouldn't go.
Oh, I know. I think that's really something that keeps a lot of people away, is from, like, I don't want to say toxic masculinity, but it's just like when people are really into something and you're just the new guy, it's really hard to be like, oh, well, I'm going in.
Yeah, you gotta be. And I mean, it drives in a type, you know, you see a bit of a feedback loop happening there, right? It's like it really plays into like a very A personality, that sort of person who's pretty aggressive, but they're also like the worst kind of person often. You're just like, man, you're a fucking asshole. Like it's nobody you want to be around, the kind of person who, like, so it's really funny to meet some of these people. Like Craze is a really good example where it's like one of the most like joyful, magnanimous, gracious, pleasant human beings you could ever meet. He's like class in a glass, but man, you see his competitive face switch on and you're like, oh shit. Like, I would not fuck with, I don't want to meet that dude in an alley, man. He's fucking Miami serious motherfucker. Like this guy will mess you up. Yeah. So that kind of tone is not one that you really want to be around a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of guys play into it and a lot of the scene played into it. And guys still kind of shit talk now, but it's like, it's very joyful and it's very sharing and it's very, especially as the scene, especially the one that I kind of grew up again outside of, but also as a part of, is just as far as the audio, the music itself was being created, the sounds were being created. As you kind of run into these people, it's like they're all getting old, like we're fucking old, and all we want to do is scratch, and all we want to do is kind of hang out. So there's still like shit talking, except it's kind of like, yeah, but my guy Veteran, like, who's amazing, he's a great scratch DJ, but when he switches into competitive mode, like it's like another dude comes out. You're just like, oh man, like it's very funny to watch it happen because he's super aggressive. Like he plays to win. Like this guy plays to fucking win, and it's great because you're like, man, well that's what it takes. Like you gotta practice hard. It's not easy. And you got to do this routine like over and over and over and over, and it's still possibly going to fuck up on you, or you might just be sick that day or whatever, and shit could go sideways, and that's how it's going to be. So, yeah, it's not the most welcoming environment, and that's, and not just against women, but against anybody. Like anybody who just doesn't have that kind of character about them, they may not really feel that encouraged to be involved, and I certainly felt that, and I could understand why anybody would feel that way. So when we do UDJ, like we take and we kind of take pride in this point too, like we really do push hard to craft a welcoming environment. So a big part of that is like number one is like we try not to burden other people with the stuff. Like we take it on our own to provide the equipment, do all the setup, do all the breakdown. I mean, if other people want to show up early and help set up and help break down, we're not going to stop them. But when they see us go, we kind of do it quietly and quickly, and they get very intimidated by that because they're just like, oh man, these guys like really are, what they're doing. Like, yeah, it's cool. Like, I mean, to us, it's very obvious stuff. It's very complicated. There's a lot of turntables, a lot of mixers, a lot of stuff feeding into other stuff, and it's a bit of a Lego puzzle, as it were. But we do that, and we take it on with just a couple of us, myself and Ken, aka Sloppy Scratches, and Lee and I do this because we know it's a lighter lift for other people. They feel more encouraged to show up. They know they don't have to be bothered with the stuff, and everything's going to be there. The beats are going to play. The records are already there. The turntables are already set up. The mixers are already set up. The house audio is already set up. Everything's going to be up and running. I'm not going to say on time, but definitely on the money. And so that creates a very welcoming environment to start with. And then the second people walk through the door, we say, hey, we introduce ourselves. We ask them right away, like, you want to get up? Like, you want to jump on the turntables? We don't kind of wait for them to stand there in the corner and figure it out, or we try not to. Once in a while, sort of somebody new will be there, and all of us kind of assume the other person knows them. Like, I don't have a fucking idea who that is. But, we try to, like, kind of get over there and go, like, hey, man, like, how's it going? Welcome. Like, what are you doing? Do you want to get up on here? And, like, oftentimes they'll be like, oh, no, I'm okay. I'm just watching, We're like, okay, well, don't hesitate, man. Like, the only way to get into it is to get into it. And especially for us, like what I found myself, and a lot of people commented to me, over the years, they said, man, like, you really got better. And I said, well, I think it's live performance that has it, like doing this live in front of you guys, because frankly, I find you all very intimidating, and it scares the shit out of me to play this stuff, to do these things in front of you, because you can't hide behind a bunch of other songs. Like, you can't just go wubble 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 while you're bringing in a new song and hope that nobody got too offended by it. Like, you're just scratching, and even if it's only for 4 bars, it's like, man, that's 4 bars you are really trying hard not to fuck up. And it's like Fight Club, man. You just, like, you get a lot better a lot faster. So we locally have this young lady. It was just recently her birthday. I don't know when this is going to be playing, but it was just recently her birthday. She's Libra. I won't say anymore. Anyway, she's fantastic. Goes by Mydera right now on Instagram, DJ Mydera. And she's delight to watch in action because you're seeing like positivity. The not a I mean, I don't read a competitive bone in her body, like not an aggressive bone in her body in that way. But what she is aggressive about is just learning. Like she just throws herself at any opportunity fearlessly, and it's so inspiring to watch it because I'm not that kind of person. Like I'm not fearless about that stuff at all, especially as regards scratching. Like I really haven't released all that much because I just think I suck and I think I sound terrible and I'm always super nervous about it. But to watch her just walk up to people and like ask them about stuff, like I never would have. The first time I was at one of these live sessions in Toronto wasn't that long ago. It was really only about maybe, I'm going to say like 6 years ago or so. And Scratcher did their first, like, so before, after like UDJ did its thing, but before we started doing our monthly thing, I went to a Scratcher. Scratcher is a brand out of Vancouver that started by a guy that goes by the name of Paul Scratch and Mike MSA. And they were kind of, especially Paul was like a real graphic design guy, real branding guy. And he had this great idea for this sort of encompassing brand called Almighty Scratcher that he designed with great logos and really cool design ideas. And his idea with it, he was doing open turntable scratch sessions, or actually invite scratch sessions in Vancouver. And so he kind of put this whole thing together to kind of become, and sort of encouraged franchises, basically. It was like, hey, you can take the branding imagery and you can kind of take all this stuff. And we want to encourage, and he was especially trying to encourage local, like competitive DJ icons from regional ones to set up their own local chapters, basically, of this group. So anyway, our local one started up, and it was being run by some of the original competitive team DJ icons of Toronto, the Toronto area. Dopey and J-Tech and Il Buddha from the Turntable Monks, and D Scratch and Grouch from the Turnstiles crew, who were like my gods, like people that I just worshipped when I was younger, and watching them and standing there in the room with them and watching them scratch. And it was technically supposed to be an open turntable session, and like this one dude, Mike Warger, was like the only one that kind of got up and actually scratched with him, and the rest of them were just like doing their thing. And it was so fucking and they weren't being intimidating. I was just intimidated. Mm-hmm. And by contrast, like watching someone like Andrea just kind of walk in with a room full of dudes and just like, you know, walk up to us and ask shit and stand there and try. And that's the really key thing, is like she tries. She gets up and she jumps on a turntable and she just tries. And then she clearly goes home and practices the fuck out of that turntable, and then comes back and she tries again. And she just tries and tries and tries and asks and talks about it and thinks about it and practices and tries. And it's so inspiring to watch. And I kind of, like, I always sort of point to her, because I'm just like, yo, like that's what you should be like. Like that should be your hero right there, because it's the only way to get better. And it's certainly, and it shows that you can do it and not necessarily have to kind of take on this whole other persona. Like you can just be that. You could just be a person who just wants to do it and wants to get better at it. And that's it. And that, you know, anybody can do it, and anybody should feel welcome to join in. Because really at the end of the day, all we want to do is scratch. Like it's a pretty low bar of entry. Like we just really want you to show up and do it and not be a shit stir. Like, don't steal my stuff. You know? It's a low bar. So, you know, and the more you get involved, the more we want to include you. So, you know, I hope that she does more with what she's doing. So I hope that more women and just other people, like people of all personality types and whatever it is that might be your thing, you just feel like encouraged to kind of come in and take part, because you should. Like it should transcend its noise making. It doesn't matter what your you know, sexual orientation or decided on gender or race or background or anything should be. You should just feel encouraged to do it, because it's just noise making, and that's a boundless thing. Every culture does it. Everybody does it. And, if they want to, we communicate with each other, and we're speaking a language. Like D Styles' bunch, they had this like nice little sextet operation that they called the Bastard Language Tour. And that's kind of the way we think of it, this bastard language, this weird subset of communication and we all talk it, and we all love it and the things that it says, and it speaks in very tiny little techniques that we all understand as a common language, and we talk to each other with it, and we love it when other people want to talk to us with it too. So so that's why I hope that more women and more just other people who might feel otherwise discouraged to be involved see these opportunities more and more, and feel encouraged to get into it.
Now, you touched on how your parents were both really into music, and you learned piano and things like that, but never really got into it. Why do you feel you were so drawn to scratching? Like, why this instrument? Why was this like, I think this is going to be the one, and not pick up a guitar and things like that?
I mean, I think the short answer was like, I'll give you the long answer and the short answer,
Okay.
especially since you plugged your computer in. The short answer, I think,
Thank
is
you.
like I was just deeply involved in hip hop. Like I was deeply engaged with hip hop, and it really doesn't have your voice, I guess, is an instrument, but it really didn't have another instrument. And I loved hip hop and still do love hip hop. And to me, it was like the instrument of hip hop. So the short answer is really that. The long answer, I guess, would be to fire back at you a question, which is like, what is that thing that you fear the most, that you are like a moth to a flame about?
Probably stand-up comedy. I've always wanted to try it, and I love stand-up comedy. I will watch almost every special that comes out, but I'm still not brave enough to do it.
Have you tried?
No, I've set myself a goal by the end of 2020 to have gotten on stage at least 4 times.
Okay, so here's the long story.
Okay.
I mentioned that my stepdad was a 45 record vinyl collector.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a little kid, it's a ridiculous story. When I was a little kid, there was this funny little thing in the record industry, these odd little kind of novelty records that they would especially press. They would only really press them on 45, as far as I know. Maybe they appeared somewhere else, but anyway, they used to appear on 45s, and they were kind of like this almost an opportunity for the record label to advertise its hit stuff. So they would be these little comedy routines, and they would build this story in like a radio drama, or a radio piece.
Mm-hmm.
And what they would do is they would kind of build up this preposterous story, and then they would intercut what would be pieces of dialogue with little snippets from like top hits in the record label's roster. Right. So I mean, my stepdad had all kinds of records. Like he had like maybe, I don't know, he had a few of these records that were pretty funny. But he had this one in particular, and it was basically like War of the Worlds. Like it was like a fake news report in which an alien craft is landing, and we're about to have our first encounter with these aliens, and so the human beings go walking up to the spaceship, and they knock on the side of the spaceship, hoping that the aliens will come out, and they cut in with I hear you knocking, but I can't come in, that sort of thing. Anyway, cute stuff. And but on this record there was this noise. And it's like this kind of warping, like this like crazy synthesized, awful sound, and it fucking terrified me as a child. Like it literally sent me running upstairs. Jean would be playing this, downstairs and in the living room, and he would play, and he knew, like, and suddenly, like, after a while he knew too that this was would happen. I think he'd do it around Halloween. He loved scaring kids around Halloween. It was like his favorite thing to do. So funny. Anyway, he would put this record on and it would send me like just at clapping my ears closed and screaming and running upstairs out of stark raving fear because of that one weird synthesized sound. And he would say to me many years later, he's like, I find it a little bit ironic that you would get into this form of sound making, this polyrhythmic sound making that involves making the exact same sound that used to terrify you as a child. And I didn't even think about it for years. I was like, huh, you're right. Shit, man. It's all your fault. A bit. I mean, he raised me in a blues tradition and as did my mother, like real Americana. So, real backbeat emphasis, real groove. And this really was the music of groove. Like, I mean, my stepdad didn't really like a lot of hip hop, which was really at the time mostly about rap, because there wasn't really much of a concept of just straight instrumental, or there was, but it wasn't top hits that you would hear a lot, and he didn't like rap. So he's like, I don't really like it. He always say, I like the beat, I don't like the rap. And I got it. But I did like the rap, and I like the beat too. I love the beat, and the beat really was like a, especially when it was kind of driven by a lot of funk samples. It was the sort of natural progression of blues and jazz and really deeply American music, kind of coming to this next stage in its evolution. And so I was kind of raised by my mother, who herself a country musician, but a very broad taste, and the pair of them really had a great grounding in classic New Orleans blues and sort of rock and rockabilly and things like that. All that kind of sound of the 50s and 60s that underpinned a lot of what would be eventually hip hop in many ways, out of that side of what would influence it. And that was what I was raised in. So between those sort of things and just being into really, something happened to me when I was young, like maybe about 16, 17 years old, I think. And I got like super sick. I got like a really, really awful flu. And it's like, it did something to my brain where I really got into like weird things. Maybe it's just like, it's like teenage chemistry or something like that. but something in me kind of suddenly started to, like, I've always been deeply afraid of the inexplicable, like the thing that just doesn't seem like it has a context. So I don't like, like I'm not that smart a person. So like when I first saw Blair Witch, a friend of mine showed me Blair Witch Project, and we watch it, and then it gets to the ending. Oh, okay, spoiler alert! Clap your ears. Darth Vader is Luke's father. Okay, anyway, Rosebud is. So get to the ending of Blair Witch, and there's the person they've been looking. There's the person in the house standing facing into the corner. And like a chill goes down my spine. I'm like, holy fucking shit. And my friend is like, right? And I go, oh man. And then, the film ends and I'm like, oh God, that was pretty fucking, that was quite it was a long setup to a pretty short punchline, but holy shit, that was pretty great. And she's like, yeah, right. Because that was the thing that was referenced earlier about the person facing into the corner, like how this witch would the witch would make people facing the kids facing the corner. And I'm like, oh. Like it just kind of stuck a pin in my balloon, because I had forgotten that detail that had been earlier dropped about how it had context. And it was like, no, man, what I was terrified by was like, why is that fucking person standing in the corner?
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing? Why are they there? Why aren't they responding? Like that fucking flipped me out. I so I kind of like Japanese horror because they get me. They get the thing that terrifies me, which is horrible things that have no grounding in reality. Like the non-contextual, the thing that has no explanation. You can't ration with it, you can't reason with it, and you can't wrap your mind around it. That is the thing that's most terrifying. So when I heard that sound, it's like that to me was that. And then when I kind of hit my teenager years, like something about me got obsessed with it. Like instead of being afraid, I mean, I was still afraid of it. I still am, but like I became like wanting to just have that and nothing but. So like I really got into like Jimi Hendrix because I really just like he was wild, like he was just unexpected and out there. And reading these like that generation of like Doom Patrol comic books when Grant Morrison took it over in the late 80s, early 90s, I guess. Reading these like bizarre stories, they actually did have a meaning to them, but he was like really burying it deep down. It was just weird, like non-contextual shit. It just was wild, and that to me was like, and became like a real theme for all the art that I would take on. Was like, I just want to be surprised. Like I just want you to fuck my shit up. I want you to be dissonant, and I want you to be unexpected, and I'm not even necessarily dissonant. I do love dissonance, but like I just want you to, you know. Like I don't know if you heard like that third album that Portishead came out with, like 3. Like it's just so wacky. Like it's so out there, and you're like, but still got context, still got like a beat structure and things like that. And I don't like nothingness. I don't like no rock to grab onto, like things that have zero connection to reality. That I can't really get into because there's nothing to hang your hat on there. But something that just kind of fucks with me and really does something I'm not expecting and does something out of context. Like I'm obsessed with it. And I find scratching really is that, because you can kind of approach that in a lot of ways and you're just not expecting the noises. It could just be anything. I mean, it's why like so many people are kind of, they really like that because as much as it's like overplayed, like you can do so much with it because it's essentially neutral. Like it has no kind of context to it. It's just it's all it is this, right? It's nothing. It's just like a mid-range sound and it doesn't mean anything, but you can just like it's just wildness, and you can do that with it. So I think that's kind of where my inspiration to be involved in it came from. Specifically, these noises was like I just wanted to make the noise. I wanted to become the monster I was most afraid of, I think.
That's actually really cool. And there's really no formula, it sounds like, to scratching. Like with learning guitar or something, you can either hear it and play it, or you learn the theory and the notes and everything in front of you and play it. But it sounds like from everything you've said, for DJing, it's just sort of practice, sort of getting your own voice and being able to play with a lot of different elements in order to get the sound you want to achieve.
You would think so. And yes, that is certainly, as with guitar, as with a lot of things, there are a lot of people out there who are just self-taught, followed no real method, but simply used their ear and got into it. There are other people who they were classically trained. I've recently met a gentleman who just he's an amazing pianist, like a fantastic pianist. He was like a concert pianist. Was doing a job. We were doing a job and he was sight reading for us, where he was looking ahead of the what the orchestra was playing so we could film it. And he was for a webcast, and he was sight reading ahead of the orchestra to tell us what was coming, so we would know who to focus our cameras on. Can't play a lick outside of that sheet music in front of him, right? Like craziness. And you think like, that's fucked up. Like, how can you not know how to play? But he doesn't. He can't just like sit, as opposed to my mother, who can sight read, but she just can sit down and fucking play. Like, and or my stepdad too. Like they're players. So the shorter answer is that there's a lot of ways to skin a cat in this particular instance. And there is actually a kind of not an established methodology, but there are certain rudimentary techniques. I have my own kind of theory of it, which is that there are these sort of mother techniques. Like you're dealing with like a whatever is binary times 2, 4 modes essentially that you can do, which is your vinyl hand moving forward, your vinyl hand moving backward, your turning the sound off and turning the sound on with the fader. So that's two binary objects, sound forward, sound backward, sound on, sound off, occurring simultaneously and concurrently and interactively. And so the way my theory goes is, while, you know, the potential combinations, things you can do as a result of that are limitless, there is a limit to the amount of actual fundamental things you can do, base combinations that you can do those things in. So the critical, a very good way to learn to start out with is to first learn those fundamental techniques and then grow from there, either through learning combos or learning ways to express those things in free ways, in freestyle fashion, as it were, unbound by combinatorial options, sort of the Bruce Lee approach to it. Be like water, as it were. Anyway, so, I mean, some people take a very loose approach and they don't really bother with any of that. And certainly in the early days, there was no map, you know, they were making it up as they went along. But as the thing sort of established itself, there was, and a big contributor to this actually was one of the earlier competitive groups that really established themselves as foremost in the whole industry, was the Invisible Scratch Pickles, DJ Kubert, kind of at the head of that, and all the people that would be involved also at the heads of it, Mixmaster Mike and D Styles and DJ Flair at the time, Apollo, a bunch of people. Anyway, this group of and Shortcut, can't forget Shortcut. But this group of people, one of the early things that they came out with, sponsored by, they had, I think, if I remember correctly, they had an earlier one that had some, I think it was unsponsored, and it kind of had some hints of this. But they came out with they used to do this thing called turntable TV, part of that sort of you know, whole cottage industry of stuff, kind of very much modeled on skateboard culture that had preceded it, with where a lot of it grew out of the you know, the California drought and LA and coastal area, you know, having to drain their pools and be highly careful about their water usage. And that skateboard culture kind of came out of this. And a big thing that drove that whole skateboard culture forward was actually the distribution of homemade videotapes by like Power Peralta and other skateboard crews. And a very similar thing happened with scratch DJ culture, where a lot of it actually grew out of people like the Invisible Scratch Pickles creating these tapes that they would make, videotapes that they would create, and they were awful. Like, I mean, they're all online too. They're all on YouTube. You can look them all up. Turntable TV, it's called TTTV, and it's all, they put them all up there, and they're just ridiculous. They're silly people. They're just like young guys just talking crap and doing ridiculous things and scratching and scratching and scratching and scratching. And us scratch DJs would just watch this for hours and hours. Anyway, they came out with one of these videos that was purely educational. It was just like, and it was sponsored by Vestax, that big company that was making turntable stuff. And they encouraged them to just like spend a tape, kind of doing their turntable TV thing, but teach some stuff. Show people what these rudimentary scratches are. So like a baby scratch where you just move the record forward and backward. And a forward scratch where you just start with the fader closed, and then you open it and you release the record, and then you close the fader. Like that. Or a reverse scratch where you do the same but in reverse. You know, or a chirp where you move the record forward with the fader open, and then you close the sound off. And then you invert that. You open up the fader and you pull the record back so that you take advantage of that little silence off the beginning of it. Like that. And so all of these, and also, of course, a flare, which would be to move the record forward with the fader open. And as you're moving it forward, you cut the sound off with the fader, but then you open it back up again and you play the rest of the sound. So like this, like that. And then you reverse that by pulling it backwards and cutting the sound off again. So these kind of like fundamental techniques started to, and there's a bunch of others too, but there's essentially these kind of basic combinations, I think of it as, that you can do and should learn as establishing principles before you kind of start to move on to more advanced techniques. Now, you know, again, like there's a lot of roads up that mountain, and really your way is your way. But if you're looking for a way, I think this is a pretty good way. Anyway, so yeah, while there aren't certainly absolute established paths, there are some ways that you can do it that people have set up and realized that, yeah, there's this kind of, what does the military call it? Like a crawl, walk, run. You got to kind of work your way through the stages until you can kind of get there and get up and running.
That's awesome. I've learned so much today about scratching. It's like I never even knew I knew very little. Let's just say that. And now I've been schooled.
and I'm lying about everything. I'm sure I'm wrong. And I really look forward to nasty comments from horrible people.
I'm sure some DJ nerds
will call me out for being wrong about everything.
Well, that's just the world of the internet. So there's always going to be trolls for everything.
If you're going to stand up, you're going to cast a shadow. Am I right?
Oh, 100%. So, Sunny, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge. And
thank you so much for taking the time or even being interested, because goodness knows we're used to nobody being interested in anything we do. So we really appreciate anybody wanting to talk to us about it. Just a bit of patience.
So you mentioned your drop-ins at Rivoli, and you said they're at the end of the month?
Yeah, that's right. So, Rivoli, the legendary venue, the vast majority of people who drop in are usually walk into the back room and go, "Holy shit, it's still here," and then they leave. Anyway, yes, come by Rivoli, please. Last Saturday of every month, UDJ. If you look up UDJ, the next generation of DJs on Facebook. You can find our Facebook group, our public Facebook group that you can ask to join, and especially if you're in the Toronto area, we try to encourage Toronto local DJs and people interested in the Toronto area, Greater Toronto area, to come and be a part of it, and elsewhere too. If you're coming in, hey, if you're visiting from Montreal, you're always welcome here. Except for John Rist, fuck that guy. I really hope he hears that. No, really, the guy is a monster. He's one of the most amazing scratch DJs ever. It's just fantastic. You got to hear that guy. He's awesome. Yeah. But yes, we encourage anyone to come by and join in. The last Saturday of every month is our usual schedule. We plan on being back at it, Halloween edition, last Saturday of October, which I feel like is the 28th, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, but we are here. I'll look up on the calendar while I'm talking, see if I can walk and talk at the same time. Old acting habits aside. But we do encourage folks to come by the last Saturday of any given month. Oh, sorry, the 26th. It'll be October 26th. See, I can walk and talk at the same time. And it happens at Rivoli, and we go on the last Saturday of every month. We started about, I'm going to say like 2-ish, 3-ish in the afternoon, and usually until about like 7 o'clock at night. So yeah, it's usually about like maybe about 3 o'clock until 7 o'clock at night. We're kind of on our own little time frame there. But if you check in on our Facebook group, UDJ with a question mark, letter U, letter D, letter J, question mark, you can find us and get all the notifications, or you can look up UDJ School at UDJ School on Instagram, UD, letter U, letter D, letter J, SCHOOL. And there you'll find we post regularly about the events that are coming up and all that sort of good stuff. Closing in on year 6 now of all things. We're gonna be,
wow.
Yeah, and that's something. We're I think we're at like 5.5 years right now that we've been at it. And of key here, all experience levels. We really do encourage, and that includes none. We really do. If you're just interested, if you just want to hang around and be irritated for a couple hours, please. This is a good place to do it. And the great part is Rivoli is up and running when we're running. So you can, so the whole place is open for food, drink, entertainment, good times. If you get so bothered by our mid-range noisiness that you need to leave, hey, guess what? There's a fully operational restaurant back in the other room. We're in the back performance venue. They're happening. I'm also very much involved with the local Toronto contingent of Scratcher, which haven't been putting together that many events of late, but we do get some things up and running, or the group does get some things up and running, and I'm always happy to be involved with those wonderful wonderful people, which happens quite frequently. The majority of time it happens at King's Landing Barbershop on College, which is itself a fantastic barbershop, and it's a great venue. Usually happens on Saturday or on Sundays, but that's very spotty as to when it's happening. So if you just keep your eyes on any of the Scratcher spelled with a K, if you take a look at any of the Scratcher groups, you can always find out information about where in your region an event might be happening, because there are chapters all over the planet, all over the fucking planet. And a lot of people are quite, Barcelona does quite a lot of events. Winnipeg does quite a lot of events. So shout out to all the Scratcher chapters out there who are fantastic, keeping the scene alive. A thing that we discovered very early on was that community, sometimes the heavy lifting has to be done by a small amount of individuals taking the time to actually just do a thing, usually to cost, if nothing else, like costing gas and their time themselves. But it goes a long way towards establishing a concept of community. And so I want to express my deepest gratitude to anyone who just takes the time to put these fucking sessions together, for a bunch of people who don't hang around to stow away the gear. And I do understand it, because it sucks. But it really does go a long way towards helping encourage community and teaching people about the activity, and encouraging them to come out and be involved in it. Thanks to all those people who just take the time to do that, because I think it's fun, and it's great for other folks too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll get all those links for everyone on our website and our social media, so you can check out all of those different shows and DJs. And thank you again for being on Anything But 9 to 5, Sunny.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
Thank you again to Sunny for being a guest on the show. If you wish to learn more about You DJ, please go to our website, www.anythingbut925.com. That's the numbers 925.com, and click on the affiliate links page. There you will find information regarding our guests that have been on our show, along with their websites and social media. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube via @anythingbut925. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the show so we know that you are listening, and to keep plucking away. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, or you would like to recommend someone to be a guest, please email us anythingbut925@gmail.com. I leave you now with an original Sunny track. Thank you for listening. I hope you are all doing something you love. Goodbye.
Plan my attack. Plan my attack.